U.S. prisons rife with human rights abuses, especially against black people, UN says. This was written by Hassan Kanu, published October 4th, 2023, for Reuters.com. What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name's Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, traveling around the world, filming this video now on November 5th, 2023 in Budapest, Hungary. We will be reading this story together, and then I'll be giving my commentary. Hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. Peace. A UN-appointed panel issued a report last week documenting shocking violations of basic human rights and pointing to staggering racial disparities that place the U.S. criminal justice system in a singular category on the world stage. Practices that are routine in U.S. prisons, like shackling women during childbirth and unpaid forced labor, are an affront to human dignity and represent the worst version of a racist criminal legal system that perpetuates slavery to the present day, according to the UN report, which was published on September 28th. The group of 3 experts condemned other rights violations, expressing alarm that solitary confinement, false arrest, and disenfranchisement due to arrest have now become generalized practice in the U.S. They called for major reforms and made numerous specific policy recommendations, including withdrawing armed officers from traffic enforcement and from schools. Well, it's going to be hard to tell the police not to carry guns or to think that we can't have police officers with guns in school as long as every citizen in America is able to get their hands on a weapon. The proliferation of guns in the streets makes it so that the police are in reasonable fear of their lives. And as long as we have a society where we think it's a right, a mandatory God-given right to have a gun, we're going to continue to have police shooting citizens and, unfortunately, citizens shooting at police, and we have to live in a police state. Wake up, America. Stop worshiping the gun. But I'll continue with the story. The panel included Yvonne Magoro, a former justice of the Constitutional Court of South Africa and chairperson of the Nelson Mandela Children's Fund, Juan Mendez, a human rights law professor at the American University Washington College of Law and former UN Special Rapporteur on Torture and Inhuman Treatment, and Tracy Kesey, a former police veteran and administrator who is now president at the Center for Policing Equity. The report was based on an investigation that included visits between April and May to detention centers in Washington, D.C., Atlanta, L.A., Chicago, Minneapolis, and New York, and testimony from officials and 133 affected individuals. We reject the bad apple theory and recognize evidence suggesting that the abusive behavior of some individual police officers is part of a broader and menacing pattern, said Mendez in a September 28th announcement. The U.S. diplomatic mission in Geneva, which represents the U.S. in international organizations and treaties, didn't respond to a request for comment. I appreciate the fact that people from other countries are giving their commentary and condemnation of the racism that perpetrates in America, but we have to make sure that we call out the anti-black racism that exists in other countries as well, because too many people try to localize the racism that happens in the U.S. They say, oh, anti-black racism is only a U.S. problem. They only do that in Mississippi. They don't do that in Moldova or Mongolia or Montenegro. You get what I'm saying? We have to make sure that the entire planet is called out in its anti-black racism, not just the U.S., even though the U.S. is the worst perpetrator of that sort of discrimination. But I'll continue. Besides the horrific nature of the practices documented, perhaps the most striking aspects of the report are the stark racial disparities among the subjects of the worst rights violations, including practices that are rarely documented in comparable countries. In other words, the UN report shows not only that the U.S. criminal justice system is pervaded by certain uniquely inhumane practices, but also that the worst of those abuses are often reserved for non-white Americans, and especially black people. That dynamic is a clear reflection of systemic discrimination and other legacies of our history of slavery and legalized apartheid, as the panel put it. The U.S. is the only country in the world that sentences children to life without parole, for example, the panel wrote in the report. Worse still, data shows that 62% of juveniles serving life without parole are of African descent. Those kinds of disparities are also reflected in the available data about virtually all of the most appalling rights abuses, including mistreatment of pregnant women, use of incommunicado detention, false arrests that are not officially acknowledged, often accompanied by other ill treatment, and forced unpaid labor. Experts wrote they were astonished to see that access to a free or almost free black workforce exists to this day. Most of the prisoners who pick cotton at Louisiana's Angola prison, a former slave plantation, are black and under the watch of a white freeman on horseback, the panel observed. Representatives at the Louisiana State Penitentiary didn't respond to my request for comment. Louisiana's prison population is about 66% black, even though black residents only account for 32% of the overall population. Although it isn't noted in the UN report, Louisiana officials also have a practice of deliberately keeping people in jail well past their release dates, and many states still trade prisoners throughout the country, much like the convict leasing system that partly replaced slave labor after the Emancipation Proclamation. Authorities and business people who support Louisiana's system of forced labor have repeatedly sought to justify the practice with essentially the same necessary evil arguments made 200 years ago by plantation owners, as legal scholar Michelle Goodwin observed in a 2019 Law Review article on mass incarceration and modern slavery. As a Louisianian, I'm very surprised to see Louisiana make it into the text of a report from the United Nations, because we're the bayou, we're the mud, we're the bottom of the map, we're flyover country. Nobody cares about the malicious, egregious, racist things that happen in the criminal justice system in Louisiana at the federal level of the United States. So I'm very surprised to see that the UN is condemning it. And I'm very glad too, because Louisiana deserves all the smoke for all the wrongs that they've done to black Americans. But anyway, growing up in Louisiana, you do not want to do a jose in Angola. That's what we heard growing up. If you don't know what a jose is Louisiana slang for doing a prison sentence, doing a bid. Anyway, my high school, Neville High School, used to send the troubled kids, the badass kids. They would send them to Angola and traumatize them and make them go look at those black men picking cotton or planting tomatoes in the field while the white men are on horseback with shotguns, looking like it's 1832, like slavery still exists. It's absolutely real that Angola is like that. I haven't witnessed it myself, but I have friends that have went there and seen it. They came back and reported it to me. Angola should not be like that. And I'm surprised that this article didn't mention the 13th or 14th Amendment. I forgot which one. But basically, slavery is outlawed in the U.S. unless you are a prisoner. Then slavery is legal. Ain't that crazy? The freest nation in the world. I'll continue with the text. The same dynamics persist with regards to other patterns documented by the UN panel. Black women prisoners represent 34% of all incarcerated women and are more likely to be restrained and shackled than their white counterparts, the panel wrote. A UN spokesperson told Reuters that the panel became aware of several cases where pregnant women lost their babies due to being shackled, and that all involved black women. The UN report also discussed incommunicado detention, or arrests made without providing access to a lawyer or even information about the whereabouts of the detainee. Another egregious category of rights violations that reflect similar disparities. The panel singled out a generalized practice at Homon Square Police Facility in Chicago between 2004 and 2015, citing news reports that revealed an off-the-books warehouse that police officers used for interrogation and incommunicado detention. The Chicago Police Department has said that the claims about the facility were inaccurate. Of the thousands detained at the facility over a decade, 82% were black, according to a news report in The Guardian in August 2015, which the UN panel relied on. Just 2 of the 22 individuals who described being held there said they were actually allowed to call relatives and attorneys, and both were white. The report is yet another affirmation of how deeply systemic racism and anti-blackness runs in our criminal justice system and of the urgent continuing need for institutional changes. So honestly, that report didn't tell us something that we didn't already know if we've been studying the history of the U.S. or just paying attention what's been happening in the news over the past few years. But it's still good to see the UN keep its foot on the U.S.'s neck and continuing to condemn this nation that say that they represent freedom and democracy and justice for people all over the world. Meanwhile, people that look like me, that come from where I come from in the U.S., get treated like dog shit. Dog shit. Go pick that cotton boy in Angola. It's real. It's real out there, man. But what do you think? Is the UN wrong for condemning the U.S. like this? I don't think so. I don't think there's anything wrong with what they said here. It's all facts. But tell me what you think in the comments. Thanks for watching this video. Hit the like button, share, subscribe. Peace.